Let's give Kody and Sarah a round of applause, and I'll turn it over to them.
So, Kody, it's so great to be here with you tonight. Before we start, I just want to thank our lovely audience for being here on this gorgeous summer day and to being here with us. Yes.
Fantastic. Good.
Yes. Thank you guys all for being here with us tonight on this gorgeous summer day. It's great to have you here celebrating with Kody. Kody, for people who haven't read it yet, would you give us a little teaser? What's this book about?
So the short answer, and probably the best elevator pitch, is that it is about a cult in the Appalachian Mountains. Usually, if you're interested in that right away, you're going to like the book. The longer answer is that it is a young adult novel that follows two very different points of view. Kayla, a teenage girl who seems to have a pretty solid life. She has a dad that she loves. She has good friends. She is a normal, happy teenager until her 16th birthday, when tragedy strikes and her world begins to sort of fall apart. The other point of view we follow is Iris, a girl who lives in this isolated cabin deep in the Cumberland Mountains in Kentucky, along with several other girls, Violet, Lily, Poppy, Zinnia. You'll notice a theme with the naming. And a man named Soul, who has taken them all in. They don't talk about their pasts, and Soul promises to help them become better people and to bloom as long as they promise their loyalty. A new girl shows up who Soul calls Rose. And Rose begins asking some questions about this whole situation. And at the same time, Iris, because she's been there for a year, is tasked with completing 3 sort of trials to prove her loyalty to Soul and to this little family. So even though Rose is asking questions, Iris isn't actually sure she wants the answers. So it's an exploration of both how someone can find themselves falling into a cult-like situation, but also why someone might stay.
That's so great. And I just wanted to say that every once in a great while, I read a book that's so good that as soon as I finish it, I have an urge to immediately flip it over and start again. And this was one of those rare books. So I wanted to congratulate you on writing this beautiful, thought-provoking, unput-downable book. And I know that this one took a long time to go from idea to publication, and it involved lots of research. Can you talk about that process?
Oh boy. So it was probably back in 2016 when I first told my editor, I think I want to write a book that involves a cult in the Appalachian Mountains. I've always been fascinated by cults. My mom, who is here today, introduced me to true crime very young. And I think that says a lot about who I am. So I've always been interested in cults. And then I am from Kentucky, and while I'm not from the eastern part, we would sometimes drive through the Cumberland Mountains or go down to the Smoky Mountains. And it's just such a beautiful atmospheric area. And there's something very eerie about the way the mountains are so like misty and blue. And I was like, I want to set a book in the mountains about a cult. I had no plot, but my editor goes, do that. And I'm like, I have no story. And she's like, figure it out. But I had other projects, so I did those first. And then when it came time to write a new book, she was like, where is my cult book? And I said, okay, I think I have an idea. So I came up with an outline. She said, yes, awesome. We were full steam ahead. And then the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
And my writing really took a hit. At first I was like, oh, I'm going to get so much done because I'm like not going anywhere. I'm already an introvert. This is not going to affect me that much. I'm a couple of weeks of just writing. This is going to be great. And then a couple of weeks turned to a few months, turned to more months, turned to more months, turned to like 2 years of not going anywhere. And by the time the pandemic sort of ended, I feel like I'd lost my ability to write. I didn't really know how to be creative anymore. And so the book kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. I moved to Rochester and was still struggling for a while. Talked to my psychiatrist about it. That helped a lot, actually. And kind of figured out the whole medication situation. Huge benefit. And got back to work eventually. And finally turned in the draft after 4.5 years. And it took a big rewrite of the first draft, but like I knew what I was doing at that point. And finally, the book is here, largely thanks to the patience and like eternal belief of my editor who always wanted this book. But it was funny because even when I wasn't writing, I have been researching this book nonstop for all of that time. I've been watching documentaries. I've been listening to like podcasts, anything I could get a hold of about cults or like cult adjacent groups, high control groups, very insular religions. Anything, because I really wanted to explore, okay, how does someone end up here? And once you're in, how do you stay? How can you start realizing these things and still stay? And what I realized through all of my research is so easily that literally anyone could find themselves in this situation. It's not about being naive. It's not about being easily fooled. Largely, it ends up being about being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people and feeling like safe in a community, even if that community isn't actually safe at all. So I went into this thinking, I don't know if I could ever end up in a cult. And then by the time I finished all my research and finished the book, I went, I absolutely could end up in a cult. Literally anybody could. And that was something I kind of wanted to explore through the two characters, both why you might end up in a cult, how someone who is smart and, you know, seems so self-possessed, at least at first, could have their identity peeled away so much. And also why someone who, again, is intelligent and pays attention and thoughtful, why they might not want to ask those questions and why they might stay. And so even when I was struggling to write, I was doing all this research, my editor emailed me and goes, so how's the book going? Just checking in. I'm like, well, I listened to this great podcast. She got many recommendations from me. And if anybody's interested in cult related things, I have so many recommendations for you for interesting documentaries and stuff. But yeah, so it was, even when I wasn't writing, I was constantly researching. So there was a lot of research that went into this project.
You know what? This might be a great time to, oh, I'm so sorry. This might be a great time to listen to a little bit of the book.
Great.
We're going to listen to an excerpt from the audiobook. This is chapter 2. And yes, we'll listen to this together to get a feel for the writing, and we'll go back to our.
She comes to us in late autumn, when frost clings to the branches of gnarled trees, chilly wind slips between the cracks in the cabin's walls, and the sun disappears behind the misty blue mountains long before the day's chores are done. She doesn't even have a coat. The only things protecting her from the biting cold are a cardinal red hoodie, which looks to have been made for someone nearly 3 times her size, and Lily's arm wrapped around her shoulders as she guides her up the dirt path. We watch from the attic window, the heat of our breath fogging the glass as Zinnia, curious and frustrated, tries to wipe it away. Could Yael stop breathing so much? Who do you think she is? Poppy asks, ignoring her younger sister's request. I shrug. New girl? I can't get a good look at her, Zinnia whines. I'm gonna go down to see. Poppy and I follow her, the old wooden stairs creaking as we make our way down. I stay at the back, and my bare feet have just touched the bottom stair when the front door opens. Lily steps inside, with the girl still tucked safely under her arm. She's beautiful. All the girls here in the hollow are, in different ways. Poppy and Zinnia, with their dark brown skin, long graceful limbs, and cheekbones sharp enough to cut diamonds, look like the girls you would expect to see on New York runways, only without the expensive clothes hanging off their live frames. Lily has a warm, angelic glow about her, with tan skin and cheeks that are nearly always rounded into a smile. She's short and curvy, everything about her soft and gentle and welcoming. The unknown girl, though, almost takes my breath away. She reminds me of a princess in a fairy tale, only from the start of the story, when to the rest of the world she still appears to be nothing more than an incredibly lovely peasant. Cinderella before the fairy godmother. Snow White still living among the dwarves. Snow White, that's who this girl reminds me of. Her skin may not be as white as snow, but it isn't too far from it. Her loose, wind-tangled waves are as black as the coal from the mines this region is known for, and her lips are a deep shade of blood red. That strikes me most of all. She has no coat in the middle of Cumberland Mountain November, but her lips are perfectly painted. That's when she notices the three of us at the foot of the stairs. So dang nosy. I should have known you two would be down here the minute we walked through the door. And dragging Iris along too. We didn't drag her, Zinnia protests. We're just following Zinnia, Poppy says. She's the nosy one. It ain't us. Y'all are just as nosy as me, and you know it. Don't go telling lies about me. I watch the new girl, her huge dark eyes moving back and forth like a pendulum as she follows the conversation. Lily turns to shut the door, her arm falling away from the taller girl's shoulders. The girl stands there, hands pulled into the sleeves of her oversized red hoodie, silently taking everything in. This girl, with her delicate, doll-like features, looks nothing like me, but I still see something so familiar in her expression. I've seen it in my own reflection, and it's been nearly a year, back in the days after I first arrived at the cabin. I've seen it in the eyes of Zinnia and Poppy, too, when we showed up this past summer, one on either side of Lily as she held their hands and guided them down into the hollow toward their new home. It's a look of mingled uncertainty and wonder, of worry and want and wishing. It's the face of someone tentatively allowing herself to hope for the first time in far, far too long. You know, Lily says, politely cutting through Zinnia and Poppy's bickering. Y'all are being a little rude, not introducing yourselves to our new friend. That shuts them up. Poppy and Zinnia are Southern girls. Most of the cabin's occupants are, and nothing makes them straighten up faster than being scolded for rudeness. Sorry, Zinnia says. I'm Zinnia. Nice to meet you. And I'm Poppy. The new girl looks between them for a moment before asking, and you two are sisters? I expected her voice to be high and airy, like Snow White from the old Disney movie. So I'm surprised to hear that it's a little bit deep and quite raspy. Uh-huh, Zinnia answers. Zinnia and Poppy might be related by blood, but we're all sisters here, Lily says. I am unsure if she is saying this to the new girl or as a reminder to us all. And now she's looking at me. The new girl, with her too large, too round, too green eyes, looks right at me. Maybe it's just a draft of cold air wafting through the poorly insulated cabin, but a shiver runs through me, raising goosebumps on my arms and causing me to stammer a little. I'm Iris, I say, reaching up to pull my hair over my shoulders so I can nervously twist my fingers in the ends. Iris, she repeats, that raspy voice scratching lightly over the name. She tilts her head, red lips pursing, thick black eyebrows rising. Iris, Poppy, Zinnia, and Lily. I hear the question in her words, but she doesn't ask it directly, and none of us answer. There's one we're missing, Lily tells her before turning to us. You all know where Violet is? Saul asked her to go clean up the shed, Poppy answers. She'll be in here soon enough then, Lily says. I promise, everyone here is real nice. The new girl gets a small smile and nods before saying, It's nice to meet everybody. My name is... Before she can finish, the back door of the cabin swings open, and footsteps too heavy to belong to Violet flood across the wooden floor. We move as one, Zinnia, Poppy, Lily, and me. Without a word, with barely a thought, we move together into the hall, ready to see him, to greet him. The new girl follows behind, asking no questions, though I'm sure she has many. He stands by the back door, unwrapping the moth-eaten scarf from around the lower half of his face and neck. Two pale blue eyes look our way from beneath blonde, bushy brows, and a smile forms under the thick mustache and beard. Girls, he says in greeting. Listen, you've made a new friend? Lily beams at him. She radiates adoration, bathing in his light. Saul, she says. I met her when I was in town. She needs a place to stay. I told her she'd be welcome here. Of course she's welcome here, Saul says. He takes a step forward, and we separate like the sea parting for Moses, making a path for him to move straight toward the new girl. I'm glad you found it, sweetheart, he says. She stands there, staring at him. She looks tense, her shoulders up near her cheeks. But the second Saul smiles down at her, she seems to relax, just like we all did. We take care of one another here, he tells the girl. You can call this place your home as long as you need to. We've got a few rules, of course, but I'm sure the girls will fill them in. She nods. Thank you. You're Saul, right? I sure am, he says, throwing an appreciative nod to Lily. I suppose Lily's told you a bit about me, about all of us. A little. Excellent, he says. And you? He stares down at her for a long moment, taking her in. She doesn't flinch. She stands there like I did once, and like Zinnia and Poppy after me, eager, anxious, hopeful, grateful. Saul says, placing a gentle hand on her cheek. Seem like old friends to me.
So good. So we're going to come back to Lost Girls in a minute, but let's first go way back to the start of your career as an author. So you were a teenager when you wrote your first novel, The DUFF, and we actually have some teen writers both here in the audience and watching at home. What was it like to have your first novel published and become such a hit?
Oh, gosh. So it's so funny to talk about this because for so long, it was something that was like kind of a key identifier of me in my career. And now I'm 34. So it's like, it feels very far away. But the thing is, I've been writing since I can remember. I was always telling stories. I remember sitting in my mom's office at work and like pushing buttons on her typewriter without paper in it and telling her the story I thought I was writing. And then as I got older and actually learned how to spell, I was constantly writing. Anytime I had a blank piece of paper, I would draw pictures and I would make up stories for the pictures. I wrote my own little picture books. When I was 11, I wrote my first, what I called a novel, but in hindsight, it was like 60 pages and 16-point font. Listen, I found this recently and it's wild. It's so funny. Even at 11, I was writing about 16-year-olds. And it was very dramatic. The Warning of the Scarlet Moon. I wrote that, and then a couple years later I wrote another, probably still not long enough to be a novel, but close. And then when I was 16, I wrote an actual full-length novel. And that was when I first started looking into, like, how does publication work? How does someone actually get published? I grew up in a tiny town in the South. For context, my graduating class had 100 students in it, and I went to the high school that served the entire county. Like, it was the only high school in our county, and there were 400 students in the whole high school. We had one stoplight in the whole county, and I remember when it was built, to tell you how recent it was. So I'd never met an author. I had no clue how any of this worked. I'd never been to a book signing. Like, that was just not something that I'd ever had an experience with. And so I started researching. I didn't even have the internet at home. So all the research I did was like on the school's internet when I was supposed to be paying attention in class. It's fine. I still made A's. So it worked out. There's a funny story around that later, actually. So I started researching publication, how it worked, found out I needed a literary agent, but I had no idea how to write a query letter, which is the letters that you send to agents to pitch your book to them. So I sent these out on my school email, and no one responded. Nobody. And I later did learn, I think several of them didn't even make it through because there were too many sample pages and like the emails got stuck. But nothing happened with that. And then a couple months after that, I started writing the DUFF after hearing that term used in my high school. A lot of people incorrectly think I made that phrase up, the designated ugly fat friend. I did not. I'm not that mean or that creative. That apparently is a term that got popular on a reality TV show in like 2002. But somebody in my school was using it, and I heard it, and it became kind of a joke among me and my friends. I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I was joking, one day I'll write a book called The DUFF. And like the main character won't be this sweet angel who takes off her glasses and takes out her ponytail, and everybody realizes, wow, she's beautiful on the inside and outside. I was like, no, she's going to be, pardon my language, she's going to be kind of a bitch. And that was the joke. But then I actually wrote it, and I felt kind of good about it after I finished it. I was like, I think there might be something here. So I tried again, and this time I did way more research into how to write a query letter, and I really polished it, and I sent it out to some agents. I had one agent request a partial and then reject it, and then one agent request the partial and then followed up immediately requesting the full manuscript. That was on Friday, and by Monday she was like, can I have a phone call with you? I did not advertise that I was a teenager. So I had to tell her, yes, but I'm not free till after 3:00. And then she gets on the phone with me. And at the end of the phone call, I was like, my mom's going to have to co-sign everything because I'm 17. And she was like, oh, I'm like, is that a problem? She goes, no. Can I talk to your mom? My mom knew what I was doing. She trusted that she knew me well enough to know that I researched everything to death, and that I had a better comprehension of what I was doing than she knew about publishing. So she was like, I'm trusting you here. But she did talk to the agent, and the agent offered to represent me. This was right before I graduated, literally the same month I graduated. That was in May. I did a quick round of revisions. We went out on submission in mid-June, and we went to auction with 5 publishers bidding for it at the end of June. So before my 18th birthday, my 18th birthday was in August, and the book sold at the very end of June. The book had sold to it was the big 6 at the time. It's big 5 publishers now. But it had sold there, and that was kind of just the beginning. So I left for college as a writing major, already having sold a book. And I had to balance my writing major at Ithaca alongside writing my next 2 books, which I did through drinking way too much Mountain Dew and not sleeping enough. But yeah, so that's it. That's how I got here. There was a lot of buildup before the DUFF of lots of writing, fan fiction, as well as my own original stuff. And then I had the right book at the right time is really what it came down to. Like once I knew when I finished the DUFF, I was like, this one is this one's a little different. There's something here. And luckily other people agreed.
That's amazing. Tyler mentioned that the book quickly was turned into a feature film with some amazing, an amazing cast. So I watched it last week after reading the book. I was talking to you about this earlier, and I'm pretty sure I spotted you making a cameo near the end of the movie. What was that like? How involved were you in the whole process? And were you okay with all the changes? Because it was very, very different from the book.
I was not involved at all in the process, which is why it's so different from the book. So basically what happened is that before the book actually was published, right after it sold, my agent shared it with her film, like the film team at the agency, and a producer pretty much immediately bought the option. We hadn't even finished editing it, and a producer bought the option. And what that basically means is that a producer says, hey, I don't have the funding for this, but I want to make this into a movie eventually, and I don't want you to let anyone else do it before I get a chance. Most movies, books that are optioned never make it to screen. But I was like, that's cool. You're giving me a little bit of money every year to not make my book into a movie. And I'm like, listen, that's fine. I'll take it. So I never thought it was going to happen. I was very realistic about it. And then a few years later, the book had been out for a couple of years. I get word that CBS Films had signed on. And I was like, oh, it might go somewhere. We'll see. And then silence for another couple of years. So the book came out in 2010, and it was 2013, the very end of 2013. I was really struggling, trying to figure out my next book. I was like having some financial issues. I was stressed out. I just come back from therapy. The timing of this could not have been better. I just come back from therapy and was trying to figure out like how I was going to continue to afford living in New York City. And I took a nap because that's what I do when I'm stressed. And I woke up to my phone ringing, and it was my entertainment lawyer. And I'm like, why is Steve calling me? He never calls me. And I answer, and he's like, hey, Kody, I just wanted to call to see how you are. And I'm like, something's up here. Lawyers don't just call you to see how you're doing. And he was like, have you seen any good movies lately? And I was like, no, but I hear the new X-Men's pretty good. I was thinking about going to see that. And he's like, well, you're going to have enough money to go see all the movies you want soon because I have a check here for you. We're going into production. And I was like, oh. And he goes, I begged your agent to let me call and tell you because I never get to give good news. He's like, she'll call you in a minute, I'm sure. Which was very sweet. But the movie started happening, and everything was fast after that. I had not seen a script, but I had an inkling that things were changed a lot. And because they weren't letting me see the script, that's why I had an inkling. But they brought in an amazing screenwriter, Josh, who I ended up becoming friends with. And so I know from him kind of how it all happened, in that he went through many, many, many drafts of them making him change this, this, and this, until by the end, it was just a different story entirely. But everything happened really quickly. I didn't read the script until I was literally on a plane flying down to Atlanta to go like be on set for a day. And that was when I went, well, as I suspected, nothing like the book. The characters have the same names. Really, CBS Films liked the title. Is really what it came down to. But they got this killer cast. Like Mae Whitman, I've been a fan of since I was a kid. When my mom realized it was the girl from Hope Floats, she was like real excited because she'd always had the little girl in Hope Floats reminded her of me. And I was like, well, this is some weird universe synergy. And then Robbie Amell was just such a sweetheart. And then when they told me that Ken Jeong was in it, I was like, my mom's gonna die because she loves The Hangover. She loves him. And he was the nicest human being. Genuinely, I could not say nicer things about him. He was so friendly, so sweet. We didn't meet until the premiere, but like he and his wife found me, and he came up and gave me a big hug, and was just the kindest person. I had him take a video to say hi to my mom because I knew she'd be so excited. Allison Janney also was exciting for me as someone who'd seen her in a million teen movies. And I was like, oh, cool, I get Allison Janney as the mom in my movie. That's great. But it was just a deeply funny process because so many people in LA would be like, I love your book, and then would reference the script. And I'm like, oh, you don't realize that you've been so caught in a lie. And I tried to just bite my tongue about it and like not say anything and just let it slide. I'm just like, I'm an East Coaster at this point. You can just be honest with me and say you haven't read the book. I'm fine with it. I don't care. But when we were at breakfast with a producer the day we were visiting the set, and they were talking about potentially changing the name of the mother in the movie. And they were like, but the mother's name might really mean something to Kody. Kody, why did you name her Dottie? And I look at my agent. My agent just shrugged, like, go ahead. There's nothing you can do. There's no getting out of it now. So in the book, her name is Gina. And she's barely in the book. And he was like, oh, it somehow slipped my mind. And it was like, you haven't read the book and I know it. Just tell me. Just say it. I don't care. Anyway. Meanwhile, Mae Whitman was lovely and just straight up said, my boyfriend's reading the book, but I haven't had a chance to yet. And I was thinking, yeah, sure. And she's like, yeah, he said it's way spicier than the movie is. I was like, oh, he is reading it. Okay. Because the book is much more like 15 and up as opposed to like PG-13. So yeah, it was a really fun process. Like, even though the movie is completely different, I love the movie. I think it's hilarious. I was thrilled to get to visit the set and meet the cast and go be on red carpets. Because of the movie, I got a free trip to Germany for the German premiere of the movie because I was the only one they could afford. And they said, do you want to come to Germany? And I said, in what planet do I say no? And it sold a ton of copies of the book. So I really can't complain. I would love to see a faithful adaptation of one of my works, but like as a whole, it was definitely a benefit to my career and brought way more eyes onto my book.
Just made me want to ask you, which one of your books would you want to see most made into a movie?
She asked which of my books I'd most want to see made into a movie. An easy answer, Run. It's the one that will never be made into a movie. Let me be clear, because like no one has read this book. It is my least read book, except Rick Riordan, the author of Percy Jackson, who's tweeted about it like 3 times. No one has read it except Rick Riordan. Thank you, Rick Riordan. Very sweet. I appreciate it because that's my favorite of my books. It's not my best work, but it's my favorite.
Tell us a little bit about it.
So Run came out in 2016. I cannot believe it came out 10 years ago. It is the story of 2 girls who are very different. Agnes, who is legally blind and has a like very overprotective family because of this, and Bo, who is from kind of like the family that are known as the troublemakers in town, the bad side of town, in this very small Kentucky town. And the story follows 2 timelines. One in which you follow from Agnes's point of view how she and Bo became friends, and one from Bo's point of view, starting with the night they run away from home together. And so you see kind of how this all happened, how they became friends, why they're running away from home, and what happens when they do. And it's just a very special book to me. My editor has admitted to me that it's her favorite of my books as well. Like it just has a very special place in my heart. And I reread it recently and I was like, this is actually really cinematic. Like this could have made a really, really interesting coming of age sort of Thelma and Louise, minus the ending of Thelma and Louise. It doesn't go quite that direction. But this kind of could have made a really interesting like Thelma and Louise for teenagers kind of vibe. And sadly, I think the book I think it would have done better a few years later, but I think it was just a little bit before its time. So like no one has read it, but if I could adapt any of them, absolutely Run, no question.
Well, hopefully that will happen one day soon. I know a lot of your fans love your book, That's Not What Happened. Would you talk a little bit about that book?
So after the DUFF hit the bestseller list because of the movie. And my second most popular book after that, nothing's going to touch that probably because there was a movie. But That's Not What Happened is my second most popular book. And it never hit the bestseller list, but it has sold like over 200,000 copies just from being consistent for 8 years now. It came out 8 years ago and it still consistently sells. And I think one reason why is because I deliberately wrote this book so it could be taught in schools. So that's not what happened is on the surface, a book about a school shooting. But that's not really what it's about. If you read the book, you realize that it's actually about the aftermath of a school shooting. And more so than that, it is about how we as a society talk about tragedy, how we talk about violence, and the impact that has on the survivors of those events. Much like with Where Lost Girls Go, I knew I wanted to write a book about a school shooting. And I had a very specific image in my head of people stuck in a bathroom during a lockdown in a school. And I've had that image in my head since I was a teenager. School shootings were a big part of my life growing up. We had the first one when I was 8, right after Columbine happened. So like lockdown drills. And so I thought about this a lot. And then when I started kind of thinking about the book more in depth, I read a book, a nonfiction book called Columbine by Dave Cullen. And that book, while it is about Columbine, it is written by a journalist who was there in the aftermath and wrote some of the early articles, and then went back months later and had to reckon with how much he got wrong. And so the book is both about Columbine, but also about Dave Cullen kind of examining the media's culpability and like the problem with the 24-hour news cycle and how we don't actually have all the answers usually until months after a tragedy. And by then, no one's paying attention. So much of what people know about Columbine is just incorrect. It's just wrong. And that really hit me. So I started doing more and more research and looking at how the media talks about tragedy. And I realized that's my story. My story is not the school shooting itself. That's part of it. The story is really about the survivors and the way we talk about tragedy and the impact that that can have. And I told my editor that I had this idea. She was a little skeptical about a school shooting book at first because I think she thought it was going to be something very sensational. A lot of books about school shootings are very sensationalistic. And I used to like admire those books. And after reading more about like school shootings, I was like, oh, I have a lot, my feelings are a little different now. But I told my editor that I just read Columbine. She's like, I love that book. She's like, if you're going that direction and that analysis, yes, please write that book for me. And I did. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of research that was very harrowing and very upsetting. About a lot of violence and death and tragedy, not just school shootings, but also things like bombings, 9/11, mass shootings in general, because all of it falls under the same umbrella of how the media talks about it. And I started writing while also going back to therapy because of this book. And ultimately, I think it's the best thing I've ever written. Like I said, it's not my favorite book. Run is. That one's just very special to me. But that's not what happened. Is the book where I felt like I had the most to say. And where all my books before it had been for ages like 14 and up, I wrote this one deliberately to be 12 and up so that it could be taught in schools. And I have learned that it is still being taught in schools. I actually just did a school visit, my first school visit, with a classroom of 12-year-olds who had it taught in their yearbook class by a teacher who read it when she was in high school and is now like a teacher and wanted to bring this to her students. I met with a teacher just this weekend who came up to me and said it's in constant rotation among her 7th graders and that they're talking about it after they read it. And that means more to me than anything, much more to me than the book sales. Genuinely, of all my books, I wish that book wasn't relevant. But unfortunately, I think one reason it continues to sell is because it is still very, very relevant to what is happening today. I look forward to the day when it's not anymore. But it is, and I'm hoping to shape the conversation around not just violence, but also around how we talk about violence and how we process violence and the impact that can have on real people.
I just love the image of someone who read your book and then she grows up, she becomes a teacher and now she's, using that in her classroom. That's really great. Our audience might be surprised to learn that you are legally blind. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure most people upon learning this are just in awe of you because all the writers in here know how hard it is to write a novel, let alone a fantastic novel, without any barriers in the way. So most of us have a very visual process, and I'm curious, could you talk about your writing process and routine and how it's changed, if at all, over the years?
Sure. Yeah. So I am legally blind. I was born legally blind. This is why I did not do a reading, by the way. It's not just because I'm lazy. It's because I physically cannot read my own books. I'm an audiobook reader. So I devour audiobooks like nobody's business. I used to collect like hardcovers of books, and I finally purged my shelves. Ooh, didn't mean to pop that way. I finally purged my shelves recently because I was just like, I'm collecting these just to collect them at this point. So now I only buy books if it's like something that I really loved on audio and I'm going to get the author to sign it. Like that's it, because otherwise they just take up space that they end up not read. So audiobooks constantly. And that is why we did an audiobooks clip today. But yes, I am legally blind, and I don't think my process is actually that different. So I still use a word processor. I started on Microsoft Word, have moved to Google Docs, was in Scrivener at 1.2. But I use a Mac, and that makes things a lot easier because I can very easily control how much I'm zoomed in, how large the font is. The color scheme is a big thing. I have to have a black background with white letters. I cannot see black letters on a white background. It hurts my eyes way too much. And then when my eyes get tired, sometimes I will re-listen to my own work using like text-to-speech. The text-to-speech plays a big role in my process. Also because I write for the ear, I like things to sound good because I know I consume things on audio. And having talked to some audiobook narrators, that's actually one of their frustrations is so often writers write for the eye and don't read their own work out loud. And then when you're reading out loud, you realize, oh, there's then like an accidental rhyme, or like a sentence flows awkwardly. It doesn't sound quite right. It like look right in your head, but when you say it out loud, it doesn't sound right. And because that's my primary way of reading, I think about how things sound a lot when I write. So I'm always rereading my work either to myself or listening in text to speech so I can actually hear how it sounds as I edit. And then now my process actually has changed slightly because I hate writing first drafts. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. But it is a necessary part of the process. And I'm not going to be one of those people who says, well, I hate writing first drafts, I'm going to let AI do it. Absolutely not. Never going to happen. Like, as much as I hate writing a first draft, that is a crucial and important part of the process because that's when I figure out what the book's really about. So I hate writing a first draft, and a part of it is a blank page paralysis issue. I look at the blank page and I know what I want the book to be or what I think I want the book to be, but I can't figure out how to get it there. And like even writing a sentence as simple as they walk up the stairs, I agonize over how to actually write that sentence. And it's something that makes my first drafts take forever usually. Until recently, when I discovered a little hack that makes things a lot easier for me, which is I dictate. I put on a headset, I walk away from my computer, I either do it pacing around my room or sometimes just like sitting on my bed, sometimes on a walk. And I dictate and I say it out loud what sentences I want in the book. Sometimes if I don't know, I might say insert something here, so it's halfway between like an actual scene and halfway between like an outline. And then I run that back through like an app that can turn speech into text. Usually there's a lot of errors because technology. So I have to fix them. And it's also a giant block of text that has to be broken up into paragraphs and like properly formatted. But at least that's a form of editing. And that is something I'm much better at. And it gets me past the blank page. Since I've started doing this, I have completed 2 first drafts of things in the last year. Actually, I guess it'd actually be in the last 7, 8, 9 months. I finished 2 first drafts, and they're rough first drafts, but they're a first draft. And editing for me is the fun part. That's when I shape the book. The first draft is the clay. The second draft is like the sculpture. And so this has dramatically helped my process, is starting to dictate my books. It's still work, but it makes the first draft go so much quicker so I can actually get to the editing and the shaping phase. But dictating is still a good way for me to like work through it in my brain and start to realize, oh, I think I actually know what the story is about now.
There was so much great advice in there for any writer. That's wonderful. I can tell that you put a lot of yourself into your characters. So you've written blind characters, queer characters, quirky goth girls. Your characters are funny and brave and flawed and relatable. How much of your own personality and experiences went into this new book, into these characters? And do you have any secrets for all of the writers out there who wish they could write voice as well as you do?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Literally every character that has ever appeared in any of my books, good or bad, has some piece of me in them. In order for me to relate to a character, I have to give them something of mine. And that might just be a shared taste in music. It might be a place that we're from. It might be some sort of philosophy. It could be big or small, but every character that has ever appeared on a page in my books has some piece of me. Because if they don't, they feel flat to me. They feel like a caricature. I can't attach to them. And even the bad characters I need to relate to in some way to make them feel realistic. So with this book in particular, it's hard to say how much of me is in all of the characters because there's a little piece of me sprinkled in every single one of them. Even in the cult leader. So it just like, when I reread my own work, I don't even always realize that I've put me in my own characters until I reread it later. And then I see my own thoughts all over the page. So like every book I've written, I feel like ends up feeling like a little bit of a diary, not because it's a reflection of my actual life in any way, but because I know what I was going through at the point in my life when I wrote it, and I can just see my thoughts sprinkled everywhere. And that's fascinating to reread. I just reread Run and Lying Out Loud, a book from 2015 and a book from 2016 that I wrote, neither of which is autobiographical. Run obviously has a blind main character and a queer main character, but I wouldn't call the books autobiographical. But I read both of them and I was like, this feels like reading my diary from in my early 20s, not because it's accurate to my life, but because I can see everything that I was thinking about during this time period coming through in my work, things that I was reflecting on and things that I was, that were really heavy on my mind. As far as voice, it's funny. I feel like some of my books have better voice than others. I just reread Lying Out Loud, my book from 2015, and I was like, man, this is way better than I remember it being. And one reason why is the voice. Is like, I was like, I really had a grasp on this character's voice. Some books take a long time to get the grasp on the character's voice. Sometimes I'm not in the final draft until I finally kind of go, okay, I think I have the voice. I knew who this character was, but how do they talk? How do they sound? And so I think some of my books have a stronger voice than others. But the advice I always give, honestly, is read your book out loud. Read it out loud. How does this character talk? Does this actually sound like them? Can you hear them in your head when you say this sentence? Is that how they would phrase it? And I like adding little quirks to my characters' voices. Like some characters speak in longer, winding sentences. Some speak in very short, clipped sentences. Some characters have certain words that they use a lot. Like Bo in Run, she cusses a lot. Agnes almost never uses a swear word. Like that's a little thing. Agnes's prose are much more like longer sentences with lots of clauses. Bo's are very sparse and very direct and very to the point. And little things like that can go a long way in shaping a voice of a character. So I think a lot about that. Like I'm working on a project right now and I'm doing the second draft and I'm honing her voice. And I've realized this character never swears. And she never says things like, oh my God, but she does say, Lord. Like I think she's Southern, if you can't tell the way I said that. And so like I've sprinkled that in. I think about things like, does she say going to or does she say gonna? Does she say want to or does she say wanna? Like I think a lot about, and then I look at the voices of the other characters around her and I go, well, they're from different places. How do they speak? What are their quirks of dialogue? And that's actually one of the most fun parts of writing for me is finding the voice in a character. It can take a while. It can take a few drafts sometimes, but I like to think a lot about not just how the character speaks, but how they think in their head. What words are they using in their head when they observe something? And that shapes the voice a lot.
Or maybe one more.
That's what I was thinking too, yeah. Let's see, let me skip to my final questions. Well, your books make readers laugh and cry and stay up all night because they can't put the books down. Who are your inspirations or your favorite authors?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I have to immediately spotlight Judy Blume first. I don't think I would be the writer I am today or write the kind of books that I have if I hadn't been introduced to Are You There, God Is Me, Margaret when I was 8 years old. That was the first book I ever read where I went, how does she know what we're thinking? It blew my mind. And they hold up, by the way. Her books are really great. She's also such a wonderful advocate against censorship. And I feel like we need her voice back right now more than ever with all the book banning that's happening. And luckily she has not let me down by having some like terrible take yet. So I'm like, thank you, Judy. At least we have Judy Blume. Huge inspiration. Another big one for me that shaped a lot of how I write was Speak by Laurie Hall Sanderson. I think that is one of the best young adult books ever written. It's another one that I read when I was 14, and I read it with a friend, and we were both like, this is so spot on to how we think and how we talk to each other. Kind of blew my mind at the time that like an adult could be that accurate. And somehow at 14, I didn't think about the fact that adults were teenagers once, you know. Now that I'm an adult and I talk to teenagers, I'm like, oh, this is a universal thing. Like young people forget that older people weren't born older people, that we were always like that we were their age at one point. And so like I'm like, oh, I see how they did it now. But I would say those are big for modern reading, like what I read now. I read a lot of adult books now as well. I'm a big Emily Henry fan. If we're going to like the comedy, I feel like I realized recently that Emily Henry's adult books are kind of like a hilarious marriage of like my early work and my later work if I was writing for adults. She really has a very similar sense of humor to me and a similar sense of style. And I gobble her books up like crazy. And then in the young adult sphere, I really love Tiffany D. Jackson's books for young adult thrillers. I think this book was actually compared to The Scammer, which I think The Scammer is great, clearly inspired by The Cult at Sarah Lawrence College, which I did a lot of research on for this book as well. So Tiffany D. Jackson is phenomenal. And and then I have really fallen in love with Hannah Witton's work recently in like a more fantasy realm. I read widely. One of my favorite books of the last year was The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. And so like totally different from anything I write. But my agent recommended it to me several times without telling me what it's about. And then I read it and I was like, oh, I see why you recommended this to me specifically. So I read very, very widely. So it's hard to pinpoint down like a specific favorite author. But I can tell you that I would not be the author I am today if it weren't for Judy Blume and Laurie Hall Sanderson, and also maybe Jane Austen a little bit. Like I feel like I became obsessed with Jane Austen, and that really brought me into my love of like classic literature as well, which definitely was a big impact.
That's great. You hold on to that, and let's go to the audience. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Scott.
Thank you for coming. This has been fantastic. For a writer who is trying to get their skill level up to a professional level, would you recommend a developmental editor or maybe a book coach or some other method?
So I'm slightly biased because I do developmental editing. I work for Gotham Writers Workshops in New York City. I used to teach classes in person down there. And now I do some online classes and I do some developmental editing as well. I'm a big fan of developmental editing, but before developmental editing, I always recommend, like, if you have access to a workshop, like a literary workshop, be it a class or just be it like a critique group, I highly recommend getting your book in front of other readers. And getting used to hearing feedback is crucial to becoming a better writer. I came up through fan fiction, so I was used to getting feedback quite a bit. And then so that by the time I was writing my own original stuff, and if I shared it with my friends, it didn't hurt my feelings as much when they were like, I think you could do this better or this better. And it meant that when they said, oh, this is great, I believed them. I also trained my friends to actually give me good feedback and not just like, praise me. Although I do love the praise too. So I highly recommend any sort of critique group or a buddy, a fellow writer. And then once you get to the point where you feel like you've gotten the book as best as you possibly can on your own, then yeah, I think a developmental editor could be a really good step potentially. But yeah, I would start first with having critique partners. I think that is like a really, really important step of having other people read your work and give you feedback who are also writers. And it also lets you learn, if you critique their work, it also lets you learn how to critique someone else's work, which is also a really great skill to have because it will help you look at your own work with a more critical eye.
That's right. Mackenzie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, since you obviously are so many books into your career, when it comes to working on whatever comes next, what's your process like for just figuring out, what idea is worth pursuing? What do you show your agent at what point, when do you decide like, oh, this is the book?
So every project's different. It's interesting. I've been working with the same editor at Scholastic since 2014, and I have a really great relationship with her. So when it comes to YA or middle grade, I honestly just go directly to her and say, this is what I'm thinking about writing. Sometimes she'll ask me to give her like 2 or 3 pitches, and she'll take them, like kind of shop them around to her team to get a feel for what people are interested in. And then she'll come back and say, we're most interested in this. And then I'll be like, cool. And then I'll start like actually writing like a proper synopsis and hopefully a proposal. So my agent actually kind of stays out of the way when I'm working with Scholastic on YA and middle grade, because I've worked with the same editor for so long that we have sort of a shared language. But when it comes to something new, I'm actually working on things right now that would not be YA or middle grade. So I'm having to do, for the first time in many years, go to my agent and be like, this is a thing I want to write. And having to learn how to write an entire first draft without the guarantee that my editor is going to be on board. Because usually I sell on proposal now that I'm this deep into my career. Or if it's a multi-book deal, I go, here's a synopsis. We good? Are we good? And she's like, sure, go ahead. But with new projects, I'm now kind of having to go back to my basics and go, hey, agent, what do you think of this? And then send her the first few chapters and then keep going from there. And it's a little bit exciting to like have something completely fresh that like no one knows anything about yet. It's also terrifying because I'm like, this might crash and burn. But the project I'm working on, I love very, very much. So like, even if it somehow doesn't sell, I feel like it was a really very cathartic writing experience for me. But yeah, it depends. I usually bring people in very early though, because I am like, I want to make sure we're on the same page. And that can be very frustrating sometimes. I pitched Scholastic a middle grade once, and luckily, like I said, I had not written the whole thing. I'd given them just like a short synopsis and like a chapter. And it was about a girl who like spends a lot of time in the local courthouse because like her whole family works there, and like there's a little bit of a mystery. And they came back to me and said, books set in courthouses don't do well for us. And I'm like, how many have there been? Somehow I don't think that's a logical response, but okay, sure, go ahead. I'll do something else, I guess. So sometimes it can be a little frustrating to bring someone on early, but also I guess I'm glad I was told that before I wrote a whole book that they said no to because books set in courthouses don't sell well. It's the weirdest response I've ever gotten, I'm gonna be honest with you. But yeah, so it depends on the project.
Any other questions?
Hi, Kody.
Hi.
I love where law school to go. Like we said, started on a camping trip, which was like the perfect setting to read it. And just to connect with like what you're talking about regarding that's not what happened, and how like the media and the popular zeitgeist talks about violence and abuse. One thing that I was thinking about while I was reading is the character of Saul, who is this charismatic leader, but he's also a human being and is not this cop like people associates. We often deal with this in like the news cycle where kind of like killers and villains and people are almost like fetishized in a way where
Yep.
the charisma and the personality becomes the focus rather than the harm that they've done. And so I'm curious if that occurred to you at all when you were writing the character of Saul and kind of weighing the risks of telling this story as a cautionary tale versus telling it as something that might be exciting to people reading it. And if there's any cases where you like pulled your punches or did things deliberately to make them not get that treatment.
So yes, this was very much on my mind. Because one of the things that I kept thinking about is when we talk about cults, the cult leader is usually who we talk about. When we talk about Jonestown, we talk about Jim Jones, but most people couldn't name a single person who died that day. When we talk about the Manson family, I can tell you the names of several of the members of the Manson family, but a lot of people just know Charles Manson. We focus on the leader and the question of, well, how did they do it? And I get why. I think there is a human element to going, how did they manage to convince these people of this? And I asked that question too when I was doing a lot of my research. But I knew I was going to come at it from a similar angle as that's not what happened and look at it from the point of view of someone in the cult rather than the leader. And I knew that I needed to be very empathetic to why someone would stay. So Soul had to be charismatic because why would someone stay? I actually had to make him more charismatic because I have strong feelings about him as a character. And he was not charming enough in the first few drafts. So I had to like make him seem more folksy. So we could understand why the girls would trust him. But I did think a lot about this because I wanted the focus to be on the girls and on the question of, well, why would you stay in this situation even as things start to unravel? So I did think a lot about that and about like making sure that Soul, while he's an important aspect, he's not the focus of the story. I did have to pull some punches, not for the reasons that you mentioned, but because the book is 12 and up. And I've actually had a lot of people come up to me and go, I thought the book was going to turn in a way darker direction, the way a lot of books about, or the way a lot of stories about charismatic men and a bunch of young women would turn. And I was like, well, here's the thing. The way I look at it is I did pull that punch because it was 12 and up and I wanted to be very like cognizant of my audience and make sure that I was still reaching the younger people I wanted to reach. I think if you're older, you can read between the lines and understand that we are only seeing what Iris is seeing when we are in that cult. So her perception of Soul and what's happening around her is her perception. We don't get the points of view of Lily or of Violet. I feel like there's a lot more going on in that cabin than I actually wrote about. But I wanted to make sure that I wasn't sensationalizing it, that I wasn't putting it on the page just to be dramatic. And so I really honed my focus to look at this cult from one specific girl's point of view. And that I think shaped my perception a lot and also made her feel more empathetic to me of why would someone stay even when these questions are being asked, even when you're starting to realize maybe something might be wrong here. Why would you stay? And I think narrowing that focus to one person's experience, I think probably made that feel more honest and more realistic. So yeah, I did think a lot about it. I didn't want to sensationalize the situation too much. It is a thriller. Didn't know that when I wrote it. But it is apparently a thriller. So like there is tension, there are stakes, but I didn't want it to feel too sensational. I wanted it to feel pretty true to how this situation might really go. And that's something that I care a lot about is making sure that things don't feel like they're dramatic just for the sake of being dramatic, but actually like have a purpose and a point. And I think for me with this book in particular, the point was how vulnerable young women can sometimes be to predatory men, but also why a smart person could still end up in this terrible situation. and why we shouldn't judge the people who end up in these cults and assume that they're naive or foolish, because that's so rarely the case. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. I kind of just rambled about my feelings about cults there, but what is this book if not my ramblings about cults?
I think we're gonna close with one question from our Zoom. So we have Lily has joined us on Zoom. Lily is actually downstairs. She's our bookstore coordinator. So
Hi, Lily.
encourage everybody to go visit Lily after this.
Your name is in my book.
That is kind of what the question revolves around. So Lily's curious, as someone who has a flower name that also turned into a personality trait, I'm curious if there was anything that made you decide to have all the girls' names be flowers. If there's a plot spoiler, you don't have to answer this. Maybe you could just talk about that decision.
It's not a plot spoiler. You find out very early on that all the names that the girls have, I mean, it's in the end of chapter 1, you realize that the girl has been named Rose by Soul. Soul has given them all their flower names. You don't know what these girls' names were before they arrived in the cabin, but this is who they are now. Part of that was because what I found in my research about cults is that so much of it is about identity and about the way that identity can be stripped away, and that makes someone easier to control. And name is such a part of who we are in a lot of ways, whether it's a name that we were given or a name that we chose. And so having someone take away your name and replace it with something new can often be a big first step into kind of peeling the identity away from a person. So all of the girls have been given a name by souls. They all have flower names. I liked the theming because I knew I wanted them all to have names that were themed together. Soul also means sun. This comes up very early in the book as well. And so he frames himself as the sun that nourishes the flowers, that like he is their sun. He is the thing that is giving them life and like helping them grow and bloom. And they are the flowers in this garden that he tends. There's a lot of garden and flower metaphors throughout the book, mostly from Soul. There's even a joke early on by Rose where she's like, he really likes garden metaphors, huh? Because he calls like his meetings with the girls where he like talks to them about their feelings and what they're going through, growth sessions. There's gardening that happens in the book. Like it's a big part of the theme around like how he tries to convince these girls that like they are a garden and that like sometimes you have to pluck the weeds in the garden too. And so yeah, the names were very, very deliberate for sure. Which always makes it funny when I meet someone who actually has a flower name where I'm either like, you're welcome or I'm sorry. It could go either way depending on what name you have.
Excellent. I think that might be a great place for us to stop. So we'll give them a
Thank you guys so much for coming.